What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and it's pretty clear that large smartphones have grown in popularity over the years, but how does Motorola's $400 flagship compare to Apple's latest? This is the Moto X Pure Edition versus the Apple iPhone 6s Plus. So the easiest place to start with these two devices is the design. Neither one are drastic changes from last year's model, and in the case of the iPhone, it's pretty much the same design since this is an S year. The Moto X Pure Edition looks a lot like the Moto X 2014, except it's a lot bigger due to the bump in screen size, but it still has the same metal frame, same button and port placement, and same curve along the corners and backside. The signature Motorola dimple is still there, but it's now housed in a metallic strip along with the camera and flash, and the dimple is back to a much smaller, more subtle size. In the case of the iPhone 6s Plus, like I've already mentioned, it's the same design as last year's 6 Plus, but unlike previous models where Apple typically makes the phone thinner and lighter, the iPhone 6s Plus is actually slightly thicker and heavier, and this is due to a couple of reasons. The 6s Plus is now made of a stronger 7000 series aluminum, which makes it less likely to bend, and there is now a pressure-sensitive layer underneath the display that allows the 6s Plus to utilize what Apple calls 3D Touch. And this allows you to physically press harder on the display to activate certain actions, but we'll get into all of that a little bit later. In terms of size, the Moto X is the thicker phone out of the two, but in every other dimension like height and width, it's surprisingly smaller than the 6s Plus despite having a large display, which makes it a little bit easier to use in one hand. Much of that has to do with the very thin bezels on the Moto X, whereas the 6s Pluses are quite a bit thicker on both the sides and top and bottom. One area that the Moto X just simply can't be beat is in the color options and customization. Through Moto Maker, you can pick your own colors, materials, accent colors, and even add custom engravings and greetings to make the phone truly your own. With the iPhone, things are much more simple. You've got the standard space gray, gold, and silver, but this year Apple decided to spice things up a bit by adding a new rose gold color into the mix if that's what you're into. For the display, you're looking at a 5.7-inch screen on the Moto X and a 5.5-inch screen on the 6s Plus. Both are IPS LCDs, but the Moto X has a higher resolution at 1440p over the 1080p of the 6s Plus. The Moto X's display is obviously sharper due to the higher resolution and pixel density, which is great for watching videos, but the 6s Plus's display is no slouch by any means. Both displays look fantastic in their own right, but when comparing them side by side, you will notice some differences. The 6s Plus's display gets significantly brighter, and the colors are much more natural over the warmer, more saturated color tones of the Moto X. This is how the Moto X is set up by default, and the saturated look can be appealing to the eye, but if you find that it doesn't quite suit your taste, you can easily change it in the settings. When comparing the performance of an Android device to an iPhone, it's always sort of a tricky thing to do because you have to look beyond what you see on the spec sheet. With the Moto X, you're looking at the Snapdragon 808, which is a hexa-core processor and 3 gigs of RAM. Over on the iPhone 6s Plus, you've got Apple's A9 chip and 2 gigs of RAM, a pretty significant bump up from the 1 gigabyte of RAM on the last couple generations of iPhones. You would think that with more cores and more RAM, the Moto X would completely smoke the 6s Plus, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. Apple's always been known to make great performing devices with what appears to be lesser specs, and while both devices perform extremely well in all aspects including multitasking and gaming, the 6s Plus performs considerably better in benchmarks like Geekbench with a little over double the single core score of the Moto X and a significantly higher multi-core score. This doesn't mean that the Moto X is a slow phone by any means because it's one of the smoothest performing Android devices on the market right now, but you are going to get an overall more consistent experience on the 6s Plus when it comes to things like gaming. For storage, the Moto X Pure Edition starts at 16 gigs with 32 and 64 gigabyte options also available, and on the 6s Plus, storage also starts at 16 gigabytes and jumps up to 64 and 128 gigabytes from there. 16 gigabytes is not a lot of storage, but on the Moto X you can probably get by perfectly fine with that amount of space because the storage is expandable via micro SD, whereas on the iPhone you don't have that option. So if you decide to go with the 6s Plus, do yourself a favor and get the 64 gigabyte at the least. When it comes to speaker quality, the 6S Plus just doesn't compare to the Moto X. The Moto X has dual front-facing speakers that are not only loud but also sound extremely good, which makes them awesome for videos and games. The 6S Plus's speaker isn't bad by any means, as it does deliver some pretty decent audio, but considering it's only one speaker mounted at the bottom of the phone, you're not exactly getting the most impressive audio experience on a smartphone. One piece of hardware that the iPhone has the leg up on over the Moto X is a fingerprint sensor, mainly because the Moto X doesn't have one, but also because it's a really good fingerprint sensor. Touch ID is faster than ever, and it's almost too fast, which sounds like a really weird thing to complain about, but simply just pressing the home button will instantaneously unlock your device. It unlocks so fast that if you're trying to glance at your notifications or access the camera from the lock screen, you won't be able to. There are, however, some workarounds to this, with the trusty side-mounted power button being the most obvious one, or you could just do what I've been doing and pressing the home button with only a part of your finger on the button, which will prevent it from reading your fingerprint and unlocking so quickly. As far as battery life goes, the Moto X is packing a 3000 mAh battery and the 6S Plus has a 2750 mAh cell. Battery life is pretty good on both, and I'll get at least a full day on either one and sometimes a day and a half on the 6S Plus. Where the Moto X has the advantage here is in charging. With Motorola's turbo power charger, the Moto X charges extremely fast, which makes it very easy to fill up or top off, and in my experience, I've been able to go from 0 to full in roughly 75 minutes. The 6S Plus uses Apple's proprietary lightning cable, and while you may not get any fast charging capabilities out of it, the cable is reversible, which sounds like a minor thing, but it makes plugging it in that much more easy and convenient. Historically, smartphone cameras have always been Motorola's biggest weakness, and as for Apple, that's always been one of their biggest strengths. This year, Motorola promised a much improved camera experience on the Moto X, but Apple also made a few improvements themselves, just as you would expect them to each and every year. With the Pure Edition, you're getting a 21 megapixel rear camera with dual tone LED flash and phase detection autofocus. On the 6S Plus, there's a new 12 megapixel sensor, and because this is the Plus version of the iPhone, there's optical image stabilization on board. This is a pretty significant bump up from the 8 megapixels on the last few generations of iPhones, and this new sensor finally allows the iPhone to record video in 4K. Another new feature to the iPhone's camera is what Apple likes to call live photos, and it's nothing crazy or out of the ordinary, but basically what it does is records 1.5 seconds before the photo is taken and 1.5 seconds after, and you'll know it's doing this from the live indicator that shows up on the screen. To see them, you just 3D touch on the photo you took, and the image will instantly come to life in the form of a short video. But if you have this feature turned on, you'll want to make sure you remember, because most of my live photos is just me putting my phone away. The front camera has also received a significant upgrade with a bump up to 5 megapixels over the 1.2 of last year's iPhone. There's a 5 megapixel front-facing shooter on the Moto X as well, but the most interesting part about the Moto X's front camera is the front-facing flash that's supposed to help with lower light selfies. The 6S Plus doesn't have a front-facing flash, but it has what Apple likes to call Retina flash, which is just a fancy way of saying that the screen lights up a bright white when you take a photo. Neither one is groundbreaking or revolutionary by any means, but Apple's so-called Retina flash does work a little bit better at evenly illuminating your face and isn't as blindingly bright as the front-facing flash on the Moto X. Another difference between these two front cameras is that the Moto X is a wide-angle lens, whereas the iPhone is not, so you're going to have a much more difficult time trying to fit multiple subjects into the frame with the 6S Plus due to its narrower field of view. The Moto X has proven to have a pretty good camera this year, but when compared to the images of the 6S Plus, there's a big disparity between the way these two cameras process images. The Moto X's images are a lot more saturated and contrasty, whereas the 6S Plus maintains a much more natural look, and which one you like better is just a matter of personal taste, but where the 6S Plus really outshines the Moto X is in dynamic range. There's a lot more detail in darker areas like shadows, and highlights aren't blown out like they are on the Moto X. The same goes for low light shots. The photos aren't bad on the Moto X and is a huge improvement over last year's model, but again, the highlights are typically blown out and there's quite a bit of noise reduction and over brightening of the images, which results in a much softer and noisier photo. For not having optical image stabilization, it's a decent performer in low light, but definitely pales in comparison to the much sharper, cleaner looking images of the 6S Plus. As with any Android versus iPhone comparison, you're looking at two completely different software experiences and ecosystems. With the Moto X, you have a pretty near stock Android experience with Android 5.1.1, which helps keep things running smoothly and should provide for some speedy updates. Now, I say near stock because there's a lot of really useful features baked in by Motorola, like Moto Voice, which you can customize with your own key phrase to call on your Moto X at any time, even when the phone is asleep. Then there's Moto Display, Moto Actions, and Moto Assist that allows for a variety of different things like subtly peeking at your notifications, twisting your wrist to launch into the camera, or automatically quieting your phone during the hours that you need it to. With the 6S Plus, you're looking at iOS 9, and if you're coming from previous iPhones, there won't be too many surprises here, and you'll instantly feel right at home. Aesthetically, it still looks pretty much the same as the last couple major releases of iOS, and it's still the same grid of icons as it's always been, which isn't a bad thing if you prefer an experience that's pretty straightforward. The most notable change with the iPhone this year is the addition of 3D Touch, and with 3D Touch you can do things that Apple likes to call peek and pop. Now, 3D Touch is not the same thing as a long press. You can still long press like normal, but with 3D Touch you are physically applying pressure on the display, and depending on how much pressure you apply, this will allow you to access certain features and functions. For example, within the Mail app, if you press down on an email, you can peek into it without fully opening up the email, and if you decide it's something you want to take a look at, you just press a little harder and it pops you right into the full email. This can also be done with applications on the home screen. So if you were to 3D Touch on the camera app, for example, you can quickly take a photo, record a video, and even take a selfie. Most of Apple's own applications already support 3D Touch, and there's only a few third-party apps that support it right now, but that number should grow as more developers update their applications. Even without a heavy amount of third-party support, there's still a lot you can do with 3D Touch, like easily moving the cursor around by pressing down on the keyboard, or jumping into the multitasker by pressing and sliding in from the side. It's almost kind of fun to poke and prod just to see what works and doesn't work, and from the looks of it, it's a feature that's going to have a lot of long-time potential for Apple. The Moto X Pure Edition is easily one of the most affordable flagship smartphones currently on the market. Starting at $400, you can get yourself a fully customized Moto X, and it's pretty amazing what Motorola was able to put together for half the cost of other flagships. The 6S Plus, on the other hand, will run you $750 for the 16GB version, and pricing goes up from there based on storage. The 6S Plus definitely isn't cheap, but you do have the option of financing or subsidizing with 2-year contracts through carriers, which you don't have with the Moto X since Motorola took a direct-to-consumer approach. You can't really go wrong with either one, but if you're looking for a customizable smartphone, a clean software experience, and micro SD card expansion, all without breaking the bank, then the Moto X is definitely a phone worth considering. The iPhone 6S Plus will offer everything you've come to expect from previous iPhones and adds a few key improvements like the camera and 3D Touch. So if you absolutely have to have an iPhone, well, the 6S Plus is the best one money can buy. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it and found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And if you want to see more here from us at Android Authority, make sure to check out the links on the side, and also make sure to check out the website as well for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.